How could a rusted junk car sell for $5 million in just 5 days? This is the journey to solve the mystery of a stolen 1959 test car, the Vanguard VX-9. It starts at the luxury DuPont Imperial Auction in Los Angeles, where Derek Evans and his 5-year-old daughter look for his father's legacy. But powerful CEO Victoria DuPont mocks his dream and kicks him out, saying he does not belong in her high-class world. This clash between real skills and rich snobs pushes Derek into a life-or-death gamble. He faces heavy debts, a rusted steering column hiding secret papers, and a dirty buyout offer from a tech billionaire. But with help from a secret professor, Derek turns the tables. Will the real winner be the one holding the $1 million check? To understand how Derek got there, we need to go back 3 days. Back to a broken street in South Los Angeles. The smell of oil and dust filled the small garage. A hammer tapped steady on metal. Derek Evans lay under an old Ford truck. Sweat rolled down his neck. A red notice hung on a rusted metal cabinet nearby. It read $4,217.83. That was the unpaid rent. Derek's daughter, Zoe, sat on an old tire close by. She was 5 years old. She held her stuffed dinosaur, Rexy, and drew blue marker lines on his soft green feet. An old radio buzzed static in the corner. It played a country song from years back. The smell of hot metal filled the small room. Outside, a bus rumbled past on the cracked street. Derek wiped grease from his hands with a rag. He glanced over at Zoe and smiled. She smiled back, humming along to the song she barely knew. The garage door banged open. Frank walked in. He worked for the landlord and collected debts by force. He carried a metal bat and hit the hood of the truck. The radio music stopped. Frank leaned down close to Derek's face. 48 hours, Frank said. Pay every dollar you owe, or we take everything. Your tools, your father's junk. All of it goes to the street. Derek did not shout back. He rose slowly and covered Zoe's eyes with his hand. He did not want her to see this. He tried to talk calmly, with Frank offering more time. Frank only spat on the concrete floor and walked out laughing. That night, Derek sat alone in the cold garage. He opened an old wooden chest that belonged to his late father, Terrence. Under some rusty wrenches, he found a leather notebook. The pages were yellow and soft with age. He picked up an old brass compass that once sat on his father's desk. He wondered if his father's wild stories about a lost treasure car were ever true. Could that story save them now? The next night, Derek opened the notebook again. Deep inside, he found a hand-drawn sketch. It showed a special suspension system with an X-shaped brace cut at a sharp 42-degree angle. Below the sketch was a faded signature. It read Julian Shelby, a legend in car engineering. Red ink beneath the drawing said this: the VX-9. Stolen from the Grand Trunk train in 1959. It still sleeps somewhere under a shell of scrap metal. Right then, his old phone buzzed. An email came in from an auction website. Derek opened it with shaking hands. His eyes locked on a photo labeled Lot 33. The listing called it a scrapped steel frame with no brand name. Heavy rust covered the whole body. Starting bid for $1,000. Derek studied the twisted rear brace in the photo. It matched his father's drawing perfectly. Could this really be the same car his father searched for his whole life? Or was this only a trap that would drain his last few dollars? Was this Derek's only chance to clear his father's name? People in the car world once called Terrence a fool who chased fairy tales. Or was this simply a scam waiting to swallow his last savings? The next morning, Derek stood at an old ATM outside a corner store. The machine hummed and printed a slip of paper. His balance showed $14,215.50. This money was everything he had saved over 5 years. It was meant for Zoe's heart surgery. She was born with a mild heart problem that needed careful treatment soon. Fear gripped Derek's chest. If he spent this money chasing a rusted car and lost, Zoe would lose her chance at surgery. They could end up homeless on the streets of Los Angeles. He held his daughter's small hand on the windy sidewalk. He almost turned back toward the garage, ready to sell his tools instead. Then Zoe looked up at him. She hugged Rexy tightly against her chest. "Daddy," she said, "I want you to be a hero, just like Grandpa." Her simple words hit him like electricity. All his doubt melted away. Derek decided to risk everything on this one gamble. But how could a man in a worn denim jacket even get past security at a place like DuPont Imperial? That world was built for people far above his world. The DuPont Imperial showroom buzzed with quiet elegance before the sale began. Rich perfume mixed with the smell of expensive champagne. Derek carried Zoe through crowds of women wearing diamonds and men in tailored suits. Lot 33 sat forgotten in a dark hallway corner. The rusted metal gave off a damp, sour smell. Derek knelt down and pointed a small flashlight under the car. He searched for the 42-degree cut his father described. An older man, with silver hair, walked over quietly. He wore a worn tweed jacket, yet carried himself with quiet grace. This was Professor Walter Shelby, the son of the legendary Julian Shelby. He was walking through the auction alone, unnoticed by the crowd. Walter did not look down on Derek like everyone else did. He noticed the grease on Derek's hands. He noticed how Derek tapped the frame gently, listening to the sound of the steel underneath. Walter smiled with warmth. "Good steel never lies about what it truly is," he said softly. "If you want to find its secret, look inside the hollow steering shaft, not just the frame." He slipped a small brass pick into Derek's jacket pocket. It was a tool once used to clear old oil lines. His hand felt cool and steady against Derek's arm. He gave one last nod, calm and sure. Then he slipped quietly back into the crowd. Derek looked down at the small brass tool. It felt warm from the old man's hand. What did this small brass pick truly unlock? And how did this strange old man know a secret buried inside a car nobody else cared about? The auction hall filled with soft light from a glass dome above. Victoria DuPont stood on the raised platform, striking her wooden gavel with steady rhythm. Derek sat in the very last row, holding Zoe close as she slept against his shoulder. Lot 33 appeared on the big screen. The room stayed silent and bored. Tech billionaire Richard Thorne laughed loudly and raised his paddle for $10,000, just for a joke. Victoria smiled sweetly, ready to close the sale with her gavel. Then Derek raised his rough hand high in the air. $14,000, he called out. Every head in the room turned to stare at him like he had lost his mind. Victoria narrowed her eyes with clear disgust. Her voice, sharp through the microphone, aimed to embarrass him in front of everyone. "We require immediate full payment from all bidders here, mechanic," she said coldly. Derek stood tall. He pulled a thick roll of cash from his jacket, wrapped tight with a rubber band, and placed it on the registration table. Richard Thorne shook his head, laughing with pure scorn. He did not raise his paddle again. Sure, the car was worthless junk. The gavel struck the podium. Lot 33 now belonged to Derek Evans. He had won the rusted car, but his bank account now held only $215.50. Where would he find money to tow this heavy wreck home before security threw him out the door? Outside in the back lot, wind cut sharp across the pavement. Two security guards stood, with crossed arms, pushing Derek to move his new car immediately. Then his childhood best friend, Marcus, arrived just in time. Black smoke poured from his old tow truck engine. Marcus drove trucks for a living and had a strong, steady heart. He agreed to haul the car for free, even knowing Derek had no money left to pay him. Loading the wheel-less wreck onto the flatbed took real effort. Rich guests nearby watched and whispered with mocking smiles. The old truck groaned under the weight. Its wheels squeaked with every slow turn. Marcus leaned out the window and gave Derek a thumbs up. Zoe waved from the front seat, still holding Rexy close. As the tow truck finally pulled away, Victoria stood on a glass balcony above. She watched with a cold, satisfied smile, certain she had just won something too. She turned back inside without a second glance. To her, the whole matter was already closed and forgotten. Back at the garage, a new danger waited. Frank stood by the locked gate, with a group of rough men behind him. Could Derek protect this broken car through the night ahead? The second night wrapped the garage in heavy storm clouds. Chains locked the doors tight against outside danger. Derek worked through 30 straight hours, without any sleep. He drank bitter black coffee just to stay awake and alert. He used a wire brush to scrape away thick layers of orange rust. But the engine block held a terrible secret. Someone had ground the vehicle identification numbers completely flat. This was a common trick used on cars stolen in the 1959 robbery, done to hide any proof of what they truly were. Without those numbers, this car could never be legally registered. It would remain nothing but illegal scrap metal in the eyes of the law. Derek dropped to his knees on the oily concrete floor. Sharp bits of metal cut his palms and drew blood. A wave of despair crashed over him. Had he truly thrown away his daughter's surgery money on a worthless pile of scrap? Zoe woke up quietly. She walked over holding Rexy and gently wiped the sweat from her father's forehead with a small cloth. In this darkest moment, Derek suddenly remembered Walter Shelby's strange words from the auction hall. "Look inside the hollow steering shaft," he had said. Could something truly be hidden inside that rusted steel column? Heavy rain pounded the tin roof of the garage by 10:45 the next morning. The tension inside felt thick enough to touch. The steering column of the Vanguard VX9 had rusted into one solid, stubborn block of steel. Derek used a small gas torch to slowly heat the metal shell from outside. He had to be careful not to damage whatever might rest hidden within. Without warning, Frank and his men pounded hard on the outer door. They shouted threats about smashing the garage apart with sledgehammers if he did not pay his debt. Thunder rolled loud above the tin roof. Rain hit the windows like small stones. The old torch hissed in Derek's hand. Sweat mixed with rainwater streamed down Derek's tired face. He ignored every shout and every threatening bang against the door. His focus sharpened into something unshakable and pure. Derek slid Walter's small brass pick gently into the hollow space of the steering shaft. He felt every tiny movement with the steady hands of a true master mechanic. A soft click echoed from somewhere deep inside the steel tube. Derek carefully pulled out a small copper tube, no longer than his finger. Dark, hardened wax sealed both ends shut completely. What secret from decades ago could possibly rest inside that tiny copper case? The garage grew quiet the following afternoon. Marcus had called the local police, and they had pushed Frank's men away for good. Derek carefully cut through the old wax seal with a sharp blade. Professor Walter Shelby stood close beside him, watching every careful movement. Inside the tube was an original handwritten build sheet, penned in faded blue ink by Julian Shelby himself. The date read April 12, 1959. The paper listed an original serial number that matched hidden weld marks Derek had already cleaned beneath the car. Walter's hands trembled as he held the fragile paper. Tears filled his eyes completely. This is truly the only original Vanguard VX9 left in this entire world, Walter said, his voice breaking with emotion. My father hid this paper inside the shaft before that train was ever robbed. Walter immediately signed an official document confirming the car's true history. He stamped it with the seal of the respected Shelby Heritage Foundation. Derek stood frozen, overwhelmed by pure emotion. He pulled Zoe close and held her tight against him. His father's legacy, once mocked and dismissed, was finally proven completely true. Just then, a shiny luxury car pulled up sharply outside the garage. Billionaire Richard Thorne stepped out, with two bodyguards close behind. He held a check for $350,000, ready to buy the car on the spot. Would Derek take this huge sum of money and end all his troubles right now? The small garage suddenly felt tight and airless with Thorne's arrogant presence inside it. Thorne glanced around with clear disgust and tapped Zoe's old tire with the tip of his expensive shoe. He tossed the check onto the oil-stained wooden table. His voice sounded cold and proud. Take this money, mechanic, and disappear from here for good. This is a generous price for someone as poor as you. Your father never saw this much money in his whole entire life. A burning anger rose in Derek's eyes at those cruel words about his late father. He walked forward, picked up the check, and tore it cleanly in half in front of Thorne. He pointed firmly toward the open door. Get out of my shop right now, Derek said. Your arrogance does not deserve to touch this car. Thorne's face turned pale, with humiliation and rage. He growled threats at Derek. He promised to use his media power and his lawyers to destroy this car's good name. Refusing that check meant Derek now had only 24 hours left. He had to get this car back inside DuPont Imperial for their next official sale. But how could he possibly convince Victoria DuPont to place it there herself? The DuPont Imperial Hall blazed, with bright light on the night of their biggest sale of the year. Camera flashes lit up the entire room, from every corner. International television crews aimed their lenses directly at the main stage. Victoria DuPont stood elegant in a black evening gown, though clear tension showed on her face. News outlets everywhere buzzed about the newly discovered legend, the VX-9. Richard Thorne sat stiff in the front row. His face looked bitter and angry. Professor Walter Shelby and the National Heritage Fund had already given clear proof. Victoria had no choice left. She had to place the rusted Vanguard VX-9 on her main stage. It was the only way to save her company's good name. The car rolled out under bright lights. Its rough, old body glowed proudly next to shiny, modern cars nearby. Derek Evans walked onto that stage holding his daughter's hand. He wore his old denim jacket, now freshly washed and clean. He stood tall, with the quiet dignity of a man who truly knew his own worth. The room buzzed with excitement. Paddles shot up all across the hall. Bidding exploded almost instantly. $1 million quickly jumped to $3 million. Then it climbed again to $5 million. Gasps filled the air. Cameras clicked fast from every side. Richard Thorne bid wildly to save his damaged pride, but he finally gave up near $8 million. He simply could not beat the phone bid coming from the Peterson Automotive Museum. Victoria's wooden gavel struck down hard. It echoed loudly through the packed hall. $8,500,000. Sold, she announced. All the color drained instantly from her face. Her hand shook slightly on the gavel. For one long moment, she said nothing at all. Amid the roaring applause filling that glamorous Los Angeles hall, how would Derek face Victoria and Thorne now? These were the same people who had mocked him just days before, now watching him become a millionaire before their very eyes. The next morning, warm sunlight spilled through small gaps in the garage's tin roof. It lit up the newly cleaned and organized workshop below. Derek sat quietly at his workbench. In front of him lay a signed contract to fully purchase the garage property. Beside it sat a confirmed bank transfer receipt. His old phone buzzed softly on the table. A long message appeared from Victoria DuPont's personal number. She wrote a true apology for her rude and careless words during that first auction days earlier. She admitted his deep technical knowledge and quiet pride had taught her a powerful lesson about true human value. She hoped he might someday advise her company on future vintage car collections. Derek read every word calmly. He did not bother to reply. He simply turned his phone screen off. Derek lifted Zoe into the fully restored blue convertible his father had once left unfinished. Zoe laughed brightly, holding Rexy tight in her small arms. Derek started the engine. It roared to life, powerful and proud, like a bold statement of victory. Real skill and family love had triumphed completely over the shallow arrogance of the wealthy elite. The car rolled slowly away from that poor, forgotten street in South Los Angeles. It headed toward the open coastal highway as evening light painted the sky in warm gold and orange. His father's knowledge had finally earned the honor it always deserved. Zoe's future now stood secure, built entirely by her father's own steady hands and sharp mind. And somewhere behind them, in a glass office filled with expensive art, Victoria DuPont sat alone. She was learning that true value could never be judged by a label. Derek never went back to that world of velvet ropes and empty smiles. He didn't need to. He had already found everything worth having. It was right there in his small garage, in his daughter's laughter, and in his father's quiet honor. The wind rushed past Zoe's small face as the convertible picked up speed along the coast road. She stretched her arm out the open window, letting her fingers ride the passing breeze. Rexy sat propped against the dashboard, his blue-marked feet catching the last light of the sun. Derek glanced over at his daughter and smiled, a real smile, the kind that came easy now instead of forced through worry. He thought about his father often these last few days. Terrence Evans had spent years being laughed out of garages and dismissed by men who thought they knew better. Nobody believed an old mechanic could be right about a stolen legend hiding under rust. Nobody except Terrence himself, and now, finally, his son. Derek understood something clearer than ever before. His father was never chasing a fantasy. He was simply patient enough to wait for someone who would listen. The road curved along cliffs overlooking the wide blue ocean. Waves crashed steadily below, throwing white foam against dark rocks. Derek slowed the car near a quiet overlook and pulled off onto the gravel shoulder. He wanted Zoe to see this view properly, without the wind stealing her breath away. They stepped out together and stood at the low stone wall. Zoe pointed at a pelican gliding low over the water. Derek knelt beside her, one arm resting gently on her shoulder. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the waves said enough on its own. "Are we rich now, Daddy?" Zoe asked, tilting her head up at him. Derek considered the question carefully before answering. Money mattered, sure. It would pay for her surgery. It would keep a roof steady over their heads. But that was not the answer his heart wanted to give her. "We were always rich, baby girl," he said softly. "We just didn't have proof yet." Zoe frowned, clearly puzzled by his words, then shrugged and went back to watching the pelican dive toward the water. Kids rarely needed long explanations. They simply needed to feel safe, and right now, she did. Back in the car, Derek pulled his father's old brass compass from his jacket pocket. He turned it over slowly in his fingers. The glass face was scratched, the metal dulled from decades of handling, yet the needle still pointed true north without hesitation. He set it gently on the dashboard beside Rexy, letting it ride the rest of the journey home with them. Marcus called around sunset, his voice loud and full of excitement, through the phone speaker. News of the sale had already spread through every garage and repair shop in South Los Angeles. Mechanics who once overlooked Derek now wanted his opinion on their own restoration projects. Marcus laughed hard, saying half the shop owners in the neighborhood were suddenly calling Derek a genius. Derek just chuckled and told his old friend the truth. He hadn't changed one single bit. He was still the same man, who could not afford new tires last month. The only difference now was that people finally saw what had always been there underneath the surface. One evening, Derek took Zoe to get ice cream at a small shop nearby. They sat outside on a bench and watched cars pass by. Zoe licked her cone slowly and swung her feet. She asked if they could visit the ocean again soon. Derek said yes, as many times as she wanted. A man at the next table recognized Derek from the news. He walked over and shook his hand. He said the story gave him hope for his own small shop down the street. Derek thanked him and told him to keep working hard. The man smiled and walked away happy. Frank never came back to the garage again. Word had traveled fast about the police involvement and about the sudden wealth now behind Derek's name. The landlord, sensing the shift in power, quietly canceled the remaining debt altogether. He even sent a brief note offering future discounts, clearly hoping to stay on good terms. Derek read the note once, folded it, and tossed it into a drawer without a reply. Zoe started kindergarten that fall at a small school 2 blocks from home. Derek walked her there every morning, holding her small hand tight. She wore a new backpack shaped like a dinosaur, picked out just for her. Rexy stayed home on her bed, waiting for her return each day. At first, Zoe cried a little at the door, but soon she made friends and stopped looking back. Derek used part of the money to fix the old school playground nearby. He never told anyone it was him who paid for it. He simply asked the school to keep his name out of it. When Zoe played on the new swings, she had no idea her father built them for her and every other child on the block. Some nights, Derek still couldn't sleep, not from worry this time, but from disbelief. He would walk out into the garage after Zoe went to bed. He would run his hand along the workbench where his father used to sit. He thought about all the years Terrence spent alone with his notebooks, ignored and quietly mocked by an industry that valued flash over true substance. He thought of Walter Shelby too. That stranger showed quiet kindness and saw past dirty hands to notice real skill underneath. Walter had asked for nothing in return, not credit, not money, only the simple truth about his father's stolen legacy finally proven correct. A week after the sale, Walter visited the garage again, this time without hiding among any crowd. He brought an old photograph of Julian Shelby standing proudly beside an early prototype sketch of the VX-9. He gave it to Derek as a gift, saying two families had finally found closure through one single forgotten car. Walter sat down on an old stool near the workbench. He watched Derek clean a small engine part with slow, careful hands. He said his father would have liked Derek very much. He said Julian always trusted people who worked with their hands, not people who talked big and did little. Derek smiled at that. He said his own father used to say the same thing, almost word for word. The two men talked for an hour that day. They did not talk about money or fame. They talked about tools, old cars, and fathers who taught them well. Zoe sat nearby, drawing a small picture of two cars side by side. She gave the picture to Walter before he left. He held it like it was worth more than any check. Derek framed the photograph and hung it above his workbench, right next to a small drawing Zoe had made of the blue convertible. The garage looked different now, cleaner, steadier, filled with a quiet sense of pride that had been missing for years. Zoe's surgery was scheduled for the following month. Doctors confirmed the procedure would be simple and low risk, something Derek could hardly believe after years of worry. He sat with her the night before the appointment. He read her favorite dinosaur book aloud until she fell asleep, with Rexy tucked under her arm. Victoria DuPont sent one more message weeks later, this time asking only for a short meeting, no business pitch attached. Derek agreed, mostly out of curiosity. When they met at a small diner near his shop, far from any glass towers or velvet ropes, Victoria looked different. Quieter, less certain of herself than she had been on that auction stage. She admitted the sale of the VX9 had changed more than just her company's fortunes. It had changed how she judged people who walked through her doors. She confessed she still caught herself checking a person's shoes before their eyes, and she hated that habit more each day. Derek listened without judgment. He told her that change rarely happened all at once. It happened slowly, choice by choice, much like restoring an old car piece by piece. Victoria left that meeting without a business deal, but with something else instead. A small, honest conversation with the man she once tried to humiliate in front of a crowded room. She never fully explained it to her staff, but from that day forward, DuPont Imperial began accepting listings from small mechanics and small collectors. These were people the auction house once turned away without a second glance. Richard Thorne, on the other hand, never returned to Derek's garage again. His attempt to hurt the car's good name through the media quietly failed. The Shelby Foundation's proof went public, and nobody doubted it. Reporters preferred the honest story of a mechanic and his daughter far more than the bitter complaints of an angry billionaire. Thorne eventually stopped mentioning the VX9 altogether, letting the story fade quietly from his own public image. Months passed, and the Evans Auto Restoration sign outside the garage got a fresh coat of paint. Business picked up steadily, not from advertising, but from word of mouth spreading through the neighborhood. People wanted the mechanic who found the impossible car, the one who refused to sell his dignity for $350,000. Derek hired 2 new workers that spring, both young men, from the neighborhood, who needed steady work and a chance to learn a real trade. He taught them the way his father once taught him. He was patient, and he respected the tools and the process. He never rushed past the small details that mattered most. Zoe grew stronger. After her surgery, her energy returning fully within weeks. She began spending afternoons in the garage again, this time with a small toolbox of her own that Derek had bought her. She still carried Rexy everywhere, though the dinosaur's blue marker stains had faded slightly from countless washes. On quiet evenings, Derek would sometimes take the blue convertible out for a slow drive along the coast. He liked to hear the engine run and feel the wind move through the open windows. He never once regretted refusing that check from Thorne. Some things, he had learned, could never be measured properly in dollars alone. One evening, Zoe asked to hold the compass herself. Derek placed it gently in her small hands. She turned it slowly and watched the needle move. It always came back to the same spot. She looked up at her father with wide eyes. "It always finds home," she said. Derek laughed softly and nodded. "Yes," he said, "it always does." He took the compass back and held it close for a moment. Then he placed it back on the dashboard, right where it belonged. His father's compass still sat on the dashboard every single time, its needle steady, pointing true, exactly where it always had. Derek understood now what Terrence had tried to tell him for years, long before anyone believed a word of it. Real value never needed a label to prove itself real. It only needed someone patient enough and honest enough to finally uncover it. One warm afternoon, Derek found an old photo of his father standing next to his very first repair job. It was a beat-up sedan with a cracked windshield. Terrence looked young and proud in the photo, his hands covered in the same kind of grease that now stained Derek's own hands most days. Derek pinned the photo to the wall above his workbench, right next to the picture Walter had given him. Zoe liked to point at the photo and ask questions about her grandfather. Derek would tell her small stories, one at a time, so she could hold onto each piece. He told her how Terrence once fixed a stranger's truck for free during a bad storm, simply because the man had nowhere else to turn. He told her how Terrence never once raised his voice, even when customers doubted his skill. Zoe listened closely every time, her small hands resting on Rexy's soft head. Marcus started stopping by more often, after work, sometimes bringing dinner for the three of them. He and Derek would sit on old stools near the open garage door, watching the sun go down over the rooftops. They talked about small things mostly, old friends, old cars, and the strange turns life could take in just a few short days. Marcus liked to remind Derek how close he came to towing that car for nothing more than a favor between friends. Derek always laughed and said the friendship mattered more than any car ever could. The neighborhood itself began to feel different too. A few other small shop owners started fixing up their storefronts, inspired by the fresh paint on Evan's Auto Restoration. Kids from the block sometimes wandered by, after school, peeking through the open door to watch Derek work. He never chased them off. Instead, he let them stand at a safe distance and watch, just like he once stood beside his own father years ago. And so the story of the rusted junk car became something far bigger than money or fame ever could. It became proof that quiet dignity, patient skill, and a father's stubborn faith could outlast every ounce of shallow judgment thrown against it. Derek Evans never asked to be seen as a hero. He simply kept his word, protected his daughter, and honored the man who raised him. Late one night, Derek stood alone in the quiet garage. He looked at the photo of his father on the wall. He looked at Zoe's small drawing next to it. He whispered a quiet thank you into the empty room. Then he turned off the light and walked inside, ready for a new day to begin. In the end, that proved to be worth far more than any number stamped on a check.